All right, hot take.
Oh,
Ready?
so ready.
I'm going
Couldn't
to
be ready.
upset the majority of our listeners. Get ready for mass unsubscribes.
Great.
I didn't know how to unsubscribe from a podcast, but I'm sure they'll figure it out after hearing what I'm about to say because it's that objectionable. Okay? Referrals are a coping mechanism. Consultants hide behind referrals because they're ultimately afraid of putting themselves out there in front of the broader market and getting rejected, or potentially even worse than rejected, not even looked twice at. So what do? Because we don't want to expose ourselves and be deemed irrelevant and get rejected, we huddle under the comfort of our warm network. And we stick to this drib and drab of referrals that are never quite enough to drive the business or to pursue our goals, but they're safe and they're comfortable, and that's what we seek.
Okay, so there's nobody left.
No one's listening now.
Should we keep talking?
So I guess we can be friends.
Yeah, exactly. We can talk about anything we want now. Yeah, you're certainly not wrong. And I think there's even the flip side of that, which is referrals are food for your ego often and less food for your business. And, what we'll see is that just because, someone I used to know or someone that I used to work with has brought a referral to my attention, I feel so good about that because they've picked me, right? They thought about me, that I take the work without necessarily thinking even about whether it's the right work. And so, to your point, it's maybe warm and cozy under there, but it's also really chaotic and uncomfortable because I end up doing things that are not aligned with what it is that I, really should be spending my days on.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a real example of this, and I'm gonna, after offending everyone, I'm gonna get vulnerable and show you that I've made this same mistake, right? So when I started, I had this positioning of consulting professional services. That was my market, and that was my market from day one, really. But I had a couple of clients, 2 or 3. By no means was that capacity, and I got a referral to a construction company, which I guess, okay, you could argue technically within the realm of professional services, but not what I was going after, really not the type of deal I was looking for, right? But it was a referral, and it's easy to close because there was a lot of trust there, and there was some immediate revenue on the table. And so I ended up working with this construction company for months. And I remember going into their office, and this is back when people would go into offices, right? And I go in there every single week, and I just sit there and I think to myself, what am I doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Like, really? Is this the best? Is this the best I could? And it was a bad client for a whole bunch of reasons that have nothing to do with them being construction, but it just wasn't the best deal for me. Again, it was the deal that fell in my lap, not the deal that I wanted. And walking into their office every week was soul crushing because I knew there were better opportunities out there that I was not pursuing deliberately, proactively, and I was therefore taking whatever fell in my lap, whatever that was, or however bad of a fit it was.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that is people move into consulting, and it's usually from a job, right? Like I had a job, and then for whatever reason, I don't have that job anymore, either my choice or theirs. And now I want to take this expertise I have and I want to, be my own boss, right? Run my own business. And what's really interesting is watching the disconnect between the reason that people do that, right? Because I want to work with the people I want to work with that are interesting, that are, maybe want to get up in the morning, all of these great things, right? Where I can provide the most impact. And then as soon as that feeling of, oh no, what's going to happen? I'm not going to have enough clients comes along, all that gets thrown out the window. And suddenly the most important thing is the paycheck. And I'm not here to say the paycheck is not important. I'm here to say you can do both. And, giving up on that quickly because, to your point, this referral comes along, goes against, everything that brought you to consulting in the first place.
Yeah, it's hilarious, right? And we often talk about the quantity of referrals being a problem, and it likely is because most people do not get enough referrals to pursue their goals. You might get enough to stay afloat, and often you realize you have a problem when you don't get enough to stay afloat. But you're probably not getting enough to actually fuel growth in the business, and that can be a real bottleneck. But then there's the whole other qualitative side of it, right? Because at the end of the day, what is a referral? A referral is somebody who either you've worked with who has heard of you, referring you to somebody else, and therefore you are borrowing their trust. There's a transfer of trust that takes place between the person that is referring and who they're referring to, but they're not looking out for who's the best client for you. They're not thinking about, I think it's worth reflecting on. They're thinking about, oh, I'm going to look good if I refer X to Y, right? Because there's some social capital that's earned in that introduction on both sides, right? But they're not thinking, oh, who's the best client for X? What are they looking for? They might not even know. How would they know they're not you, right? So they're going to refer you to whoever they think might be a fit, and they have no real idea who's a good fit. And therefore you have no control over the quality of your clients. And to your point, it's ironic, right? Because you likely went into business and became a consultant to have choice and to have agency. I kind of think of it as, it's like somebody else is making dinner every night and you have no say in what's for dinner. So if there's nothing else on the table, bon appetit, you're gonna eat because that's what's on the table, right? But wouldn't you prefer to have some say in what you're having for dinner?
Yeah, I mean, your metaphor kind of falls flat because I want both. I want say and I want someone else to cook for
Well,
me,
yeah,
but
if someone else can make it,
you're
you
saying
want
that's
to
not
tell
an
them what to
option
make,
in
right?
this
So the
context.
personal chef is really the ideal
Exactly.
solution here, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But so let's talk about referrals for a moment, because what we're not saying is that referrals are bad. Like, I want to be clear about that. But what we are saying is some referrals are bad, right? And some referrals are good. So let's talk for a moment about how to shift that balance between the kind of weak, lazy, unproductive referrals and referrals that actually serve the purpose that you want them to serve.
I mean, to me, the key is it all comes back down to being clear on what you want, having criteria, having what I think we've referred to in previous episodes as standards. I had a chat with Anna on the podcast. We're probably going back a few months, and Anna told this story about how she had fired a client, and I interviewed her about the story, and the moral of the story was she had started working with a client that was below her standards. And when she realized they were below her standards, at that point, the most profitable thing to do was fire the client and replace them with somebody who meets her standards. And I think that's what this comes down to is have standards around the types of clients, the types of organizations, the types of people, and be really clear about those criteria, acknowledging that your referral sources are not going to know. And maybe there's a process of educating them that's kind of an aside, but they're not going to know. But you can then use that as the filter. When referrals come in, you can then use that as a filter to decide, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? However, when you have that profile, when you have those standards, now there's nothing stopping you from going out and pursuing business more deliberately. Because usually the key block for a lot of people is, well, I want to take on clients and find my own clients and make my own dinner, but I don't know what to make. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know who to pursue. I don't know how to pursue them. One of the key challenges there is just not having clarity on who you want to pursue to begin with.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we've sort of poo-pooed referrals here, but I think, what we're saying is they can still be part of your business. They probably need to be a much smaller part of your business than you are allowing them to be, especially if you're just launching, right? If you're just getting started. But you need to, like any tool, use them well, right? Use them for the purpose for which they were designed, and use them in a way that serves you instead of using them in a way that sets you up for dealing with this grief.
And I think, also just think like a business owner, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we've had this conversation many times that not enough consultants think like business owners. So if you were an investor, let's say, and I brought to you a business that makes $250,000 a year, uh, no real margin, all that money gets paid out to the founder, right? And it's entirely reliant on referrals, and there's no growth. What investor in their right mind would even look twice at that business? Like, that's a bad business.
Mhm.
But that is what we call the consulting business, right? So I think also just you need to have more of that business owner entrepreneurial mindset. I'm not saying you have to scale to the moon or get to seven figures or multiple seven figures, but some growth ought to be desirable. Some growth ought to be on your agenda, and being entirely reliant on a very small network of people to send you opportunity should be perceived as highly risky.